Purpose Highway is a space for discussions that drive connections toward people's highest purpose to build a better self and a better world. Join me for Season 1, where I start to uncover stories of entrepreneurs and thinkers that are making an impact. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and enjoy today's episode. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. Locally made in Brooklyn, It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's itsnola.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello, everybody. It's Scott Mason, revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. And sitting next to me in the front seat today is Cole Pasley. Cole, you have been with the United States Air Force for 16 years. You currently work as a superintendent with the EOD Technology Division, which forecasts long-term military threats and the technology needed to address them. You also worked for approximately 15 years in explosive ordnance disposal, which we'll discuss and explain about in much more detail within the next few minutes. You also have master's degrees in religion and in strategic leadership. Cole, welcome to this show.
Thank you. Thanks.
Tell us, what is explosive ordnance disposal?
Yeah, Scott. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to have a conversation here. So, explosive ordnance disposal, simply stated, we're kind of like the military's bomb squad. Just for the kind of the lay person there, we handle what we call conventional rounds, right? So there's artillery, there's aircraft bombs, there's landmines, rockets, grenades. We deal with nuclear weapons, biological, chemical weapons, aircraft explosive hazards. So, your ejection seats and your bomb racks and things like that are just laced with explosives. We do special operations forces. We deal with improvised explosive devices. So a lot of the stuff that I'm sure we'll talk about later. My experience in Iraq and Afghanistan was a lot of the roadside bombs, which is, IEDs, which is short for improvised explosive devices. So, we go around when there's an accident, an incident, or somebody trying to hurt coalition or U.S. forces. We go out and try to take care of that and clean it up.
I want to make sure that I heard something correctly, because you mentioned it in passing, but to my ears, it's very dramatic. Among the devices that you all are tasked with disassembling or deactivating, whatever the lay term is, are nuclear bombs.
Right. Yeah. So there's obviously not getting too deep into the weeds there, but it's no secret that the U.S. has a deterrence capability, and it's our job to make sure that capability is safe, it's reliable, and God forbid if we ever did need to use it, that it can be done so safely, and if these things are being moved around, incidents do happen. Forklift hits something, in the way or something like that, and we go in and make sure everything's safe and get them repaired and on their way, and and taken care of.
So this will probably be the only time, but maybe not, but I hope so, that nuclear bombs are the subject of one of the guests' discussion points.
Right.
And that is itself a remarkable point to just get into in this episode. But I'm sure, fortunately, and if so, you might not be able to talk about it, that the majority of the work that you've been involved in has not involved disassembling nuclear bombs.
Right. No, not at all.
Thank God.
Right. Yeah.
So how did you end up in this work?
Well, it's, that I kind of joke around. I say a really, really good recruiter is what got me into it. No, really joining the military was, I guess, kind of an escape for me. So my parents, they divorced. I think I was around 3 or 4 years old. So I should pause here, right? I'm not a victim, and that's not really what I'm trying to do. Some people have, very, very real traumatic situations around their parents, and that is not me. Both of my parents were and are great people. They were, very involved in my life, things like that. So I'm not trying to, play a traumatic card here. And actually, my step parents are great, very involved in my life. My in-laws are great. So really, I ended up with 3 sets of parents. So that's not it at all. But with all that said, my parents, when I look back during that period, you look back in your head, and your parents are always older than you, in your head. I look back to that time, and my parents then are about 7 to 8 years younger than I am now.
Wow.
When all of that took place, and I'm, immature enough as it is. So I look back, my parents, they're probably 26 years old. They're both, very hurt, going through a traumatic experience. And, I look at people in their mid-20s now. People just do childish stuff. So there was definitely an element, during the divorce of my parents, each trying to kind of, mentor and mold me in the way that they wanted, which didn't always align with what the other one wanted. And best intentions, I'm sure. But I kind of grew up, right, with that undertone of my mom kind of, was pulling me one way with her, really good intentions. My dad was pulling me his way with really good intentions. And military was kind of my escape, to be honest. I really hadn't invested much effort into high school. So there really weren't a lot of colleges out there looking to pay me money to come be mediocre at their school. Scholarships weren't in the cards. So the military was really like my kind of just way to do it on my own. I was 18, fresh out of high school. I think my mom wanted me to go to college. I think my dad wanted me to stay local, and the military was kind of my way to do neither of those things. So,
where was your family from? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, born and raised in Georgia.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir. North Georgia. I was recruited out of Tennessee, and actually, if you remember, some years back, there was a recruiting station in southern Tennessee, there in Chattanooga, that had the big shooting, the incident, the attack there, and that was actually the recruiting station where I was recruited out of. So during that process, I went and I took the entry test, the ASVAB's what we call it, and the recruiter said, hey, here's a book of jobs you can pick. Choose, I think 4 is what I had to choose from, and he told me, EOD, it's you're kind of like on a bomb squad. You play with robots and blow stuff up. And little did I know that was, we were really surging into Iraq during that period, and the roadside bombs were starting to pick up. So they really needed EOD people out on the battlefield. So good recruiter to sell that to me. So I picked it. It sounded fun. Didn't really know what it was until I got into EOD school. But looking back, really kind of what I look back now and think of as divine direction. Because if I had to do it all over again, knowing what I know now, I would do it in a heartbeat.
What was your reaction once you figured out exactly what it was?
Oh, I don't know. I would say reactions. I guess there were a lot. It was during EOD school, right, where we're going through the different phases, and it's here's how to they give you these hypothetical training scenarios, and there's always some I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but some hazardous incident, and you're showing up, you don't know a lot of information about it, and they put you on the ground as the EOD guy, and now you have to walk down on this unknown item. You have to look at it, take measurements, try to figure out what the item is, what kind of fuse it has, how it's going to detonate. Then you go back into your publication manuals and try to figure out how to disarm it. And then once you do that, you take it somewhere safe and blow it up. So I kind of started to piece it together. And then they started talking about the IEDs, and right, I watched the news, so I kind of put two and two together, and I was like, okay, so this is what I'm going to be doing. And but what went hand in hand with that, Scott, is as we went through school, what they were telling us from day one is, you're part of an elite community. You'll make the best friends that you'll ever have in EOD. And as we were going through, I was already starting to build this type of camaraderie. It's really a family. When I was tossing around joining the military back in high school, people told me, you'll make the best friends that you've ever had in the military. And what I ended up getting in EOD was another family. So my children are willed, should something happen to my wife and I, to a friend that I met in EOD, right? So we picked up a family. So that's what I figured out going through school is, man, I'm going to face some pretty big danger here, but I'm going to do it with some really good friends and people who I know have my back.
When you were studying this stuff, was it, particularly at the beginning, was it some sort of dry, theoretical, technical manual sort of learning that was detached from the reality of what might happen? Or from the day you started, were you able to fully grasp the reality that this training that you were engaging in might one day, if you made a mistake, literally blow up in your face?
Right. So it's a little bit of both of those, Scott. There's a, for your audience that's ever been in, academics or curriculum development or things like that. And I actually later in my career got a chance to go back to the schoolhouse and be an instructor. So I kind of got the after the fact, behind the curtain peek, right? So you have to have standards to test people too. So, you obviously can't blow up somebody in a training environment. So you have to find a way to communicate that. So going throughout EOD school, a score of 85 on our tests was the cutoff. Anything below an 85 was a failure. Well, we had what are called critical safety violations, and any one critical safety violation was a 16-point hit. So there were numerous ways to fail a test off of one mistake, and that was kind of how that was communicated is you've got to be on your game. One mistake, one oversight can end your life in this career field.
Not only that, but potentially, I would imagine, the lives of a lot of other people too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You said that the people in school with you became your family. Talk to us a little bit about why you think that happens and how you think it happens.
Yeah, there's I don't want to jump ahead too much, but that's a thread I'm still pulling. Going and we can talk kind of the cultural shift in people's identities and purposes and things later on. But what I realized experientially is there's something that builds team cohesion. There's something that builds camaraderie. There's something that builds trust. And I lived through that. And when I went through my second master's degree in strategic leadership, I started reading a little bit of the literature, the team building things and of that nature. And then I went on and started a PhD last year. And that's one of the things that I want to research is what is it that does that? Because I know that I went through this experience. I know that I developed the closest friends and family I've ever had in my life, I want to go back and say, man, what did that? Like, how do we harness that and apply that into other contexts? Just kind of experientially for me, there's a level of transparency there. So let me back up a little bit. I guess the first thing is a common enemy. There's a common enemy, and in our situation there, it was call it the tests, the curriculum, the instructors, whatever. But the environment of the school created that challenge and that obstacle that we had to overcome, because it's a tough school. I believe I started out with, the memory's a little fuzzy now, I think it was about 15 in my original class down at our selection course originally. And out of that 15, I believe about 3 of us graduated all the way through. It's a tough curriculum. It's a tough course. So there's that challenge to overcome. You bond together. And then you develop transparency when you're spending that much time. When I was going through school, our first formation was 5 a.m. We would go out, we would study, we would do all of our stuff. We would go to the school, then we would come back, and our evening PT formation was at 4 o'clock, and then we would work out and exercise until 5 or 5:30, then shower up, go get dinner, and then it's bed and do it all over. So we're spending 12 to 14 hours a day together. So there's an element of transparency there. You get to know somebody very, very well during that period. And then with transparency, I think you get vulnerability, right? You start becoming transparent with people, and then you open yourself up, because once you're transparent, people start to see maybe some of your darker corners, right? And there's that vulnerability that happens, and you develop trust. There's a saying out there, and I can't remember where I heard it, but they said there's very few people that you trust with your money, your life, and your spouse. And in EOD, I have found numerous people who have the key to my house. I'm out of town. Yeah, come on over, stay the night. You need a place to stay. It's phenomenal. But I know I side skirted around that answer, but that's something I really want to find out.
Well, it does raise some interesting points, though. Those of us that work in the civilian world often have life experiences in our professional spheres that are in similarly large organizations as the military. They're not similar in substance, although to some extent all large organizations are probably alike. But the culture of some of these organizations, particularly in the private sector, that rely on cooperation and trust in order to achieve their business objectives, often do not support transparency and vulnerability within the teams. And what you're saying is that in a large organization where the stakes are higher potentially than any business objective, transparency actually is crucial to the team achieving its objectives. So it does raise to me a question as to whether this bias against transparency and vulnerability in large organizational life really is undercutting our ability to perform. Do you have any random thoughts hearing that?
A lot of random thoughts. I'm just I'm still in my coursework for the doctoral studies, but I have been, just poking around journals trying to see what I can find. And it's, there's a lot of randomness there. And I don't know, vulnerability brings with it vulnerability, right? And I think as humans, we try to protect against that, especially, and this, and I think, having never lived a single day of my adult life outside of the military, I can't really speak to this smartly, but I would imagine that in the corporate business world, that the level of competition that is out there may not be very conducive to vulnerability. I do know I've read, some journals that talk about, competitive promotion systems, competitive award systems, and how those don't don't tend to breed transparency. So it's something. I think you're right. There's not enough of a focus on transparency, and I do think that there's even an aversion to transparency, and I don't know if it's a self-preservation, if it's a spirit of competitiveness, but it's a really interesting thread to pull, I think.
One other thing that is fascinating on the topic of transparency and vulnerability and openness is the stereotype that many in the civilian world have of the military life, particularly in these high stress elite sort of environments like the one you have been in, that a lot of the behavior patterns that the men in particular engage in must surely be hyper macho, only tough, not one in which there could be a sense of perhaps openness, true openness that would lead to the sort of trust that you're talking about, where people would trust their spouse with another man or with someone else who may or may not have a spouse.
Yeah. And there's, for sure. And there's, transparency comes in a lot of different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be a, kind of a kumbaya around the fire type situation. It's just being open. And sometimes, some people are gruff, some people are less gruff. But it's that openness, right? And and again, we may end up approaching this later, but during the 2009-2010 timeframe, where we were losing a lot of people in the EOD community, there were a lot of times where there's a room full of your battle hardened warriors, right? And we're just piled on top of each other crying, and just opening up with one another like that. So yeah, it's different than what a lot of people would imagine, I think. Yeah.
Mistakes. A lot of times in workplaces, sometimes even in personal lives, people are told that they cannot make a mistake. And that creates pressure that many folks simply cannot withstand. In your situation, if you're called into an actual real life scenario, as the testing system that you described earlier, where you would fail if you got below an 85, sometimes mistakes literally could not be made. How did you learn to deal with that pressure?
Yeah, that's another good question there. So I want to be careful not to like over glamorize this, right? Because we make plenty of mistakes, and even in combat situations and on IEDs, I've made mistakes, and we kind of joke about, man, it's better to be lucky than good, a lot of days. But yeah, it's high pressure, and I think maybe what you're getting at is how do we deal with that pressure that's always on us? I think, and it's what I learned going through some of the experiences that I went through is just not to take myself so dang seriously all the time. Like there's bigger and more important things out there than beating yourself down, or beating one of your subordinates or your troops or your friends or your peers down for slipping up, right? But that's why the other really neat thing about EOD is we work in teams. Very, 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 very rarely do you find yourself alone on an operation. So that's part of that trust concept, is when I make a mistake, I trust that my brother and my sister is right there behind me to holler at me, to stop me, and to catch that mistake. So we rely very heavily on the team construct, which is why trust comes into play there.
How long was school?
In total, it was about a year for me, Scott.
After you graduated, as one of 3 people in your cohort, amazing.
Sure.
What happened next?
Yeah, so each service does it differently. So the other kind of unique thing about EOD is we're a joint community. So when I say 15 of us started, 3 of us graduated, there wasn't 3 of us on the podium. What we end up getting recycled back into other classes. So you have a larger class that graduates. You've just been kind of compiled together from other classes. So you have Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force all in the same class, and each service kind of handles their graduates differently. So, a couple of friends of mine in the Army, they were in Iraq almost immediately. The way that we were doing it during that period in the Air Force was you leave EOD school and you go to your first unit, your active duty unit, and mine was in South Carolina. And from that point, I had about another year to year and a half of on-the-job training to do before I was even certified to do even the basic tasks unsupervised. So I went to South Carolina and I started this on-the-job process to start getting my certifications.
And then after that?
So after that is my first deployment. I got tasked to go to Iraq in 2007.
For those who might not be familiar with the political environment or the large-scale environment that was going on in Iraq, talk to us a little bit about what you were entering into.
Sure. For me, so I go into Iraq and I had just gotten married. So my wife and I, we'd gotten married, and I'd kind of uprooted her from where she lived, brought her to South Carolina, and then my deployment was short notice. Sometimes you have 6 months to even a year to prepare. My boss came to me and he said, "Hey, would you mind taking this deployment?" I was like, "No, when's it leaving?" And he's like, "We go to training on Tuesday." So I had less than a week to get back and tell my brand new wife, "Hey, I'm heading out." I was young, Scott. I kind of knew what was going on. I didn't really understand the overall political landscape. What I knew at that time is, I remembered 9/11. And I remembered the invasion into Iraq. My cousin was in the 101st Airborne. He was infantry, and he was part of the initial invasion. And I knew the stories from what I consider back then kind of the old dogs, the guys that had been in and out of the battle zone a few times, and they came back to South Carolina, bringing those stories back. My first boss that I had, who ended up subsequently getting killed in Afghanistan, but listening to his stories from his deployments. So being the young, naive 20-year-old adrenaline junkie that I was, what I knew is that I was going to get to go actually perform this job that I'd been training for 2.5 years to do, and finally start getting some of that street cred, as they call it, of some of these veterans coming back. I also knew that our job wasn't out there. In EOD, we're not typically aggressors. We are out there to try to take something that is meant to maim, kill, or destroy, and we're supposed to prevent that thing from doing that. So I also knew that I was going to try to hopefully do my job and get home, but in the process, make it so that other Americans and some of our coalition forces could also get back home to their families.
And I have to ask, because I know people watching or listening want to know, how did your wife respond when you told her?
So the one thing I did have going for me is my wife is what we kind of a term of endearment the military uses. She's a military brat. So her dad did. He was, I think, just over 27 years in the military. So his retirement ceremony was 3 days before our wedding. So it's kind of like she gave up one military ID card and took another one for me. So she was very much accustomed to the military lifestyle. Her father, he was a F-16 crew chief. And then, I was obviously EOD, so a little bit of a different culture. So she was concerned. She didn't really, I think, know the extent of what we were going to do, but I think she knew enough to know that she needed to be pretty concerned. But she also knew it was coming. I'd talked to her dad had talked to her a little bit, and it was we just rescued a puppy, and she's it was kind of like, well, at least I have this dog to keep me company now. But I'll tell you, Scott, we got married really young. I've had 4 deployments. I've had countless other mobilizations, and I would have probably divorced myself about a dozen times by now. And she has stuck with it like a trooper. So yeah, she did amazing. She responded awesomely.
And do you have the puppy to thank for that?
Probably, yeah, a large part. Yeah.
What is the puppy's name, by the way?
Yeah. Well, so her name was Chloe, and unfortunately, she passed away. Let's see, it was back in 2017. But yeah, she's a good dog.
So you go to Iraq. Where did you go?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about it.
I was in. They call it FOB War. We bounced around. So the thing with kind of the Air Force EOD construct is I mentioned our job being joint service, right? So there was a really big shortage of EOD people during this period. So we would get attached to infantry units. So I would deploy as an Air Force asset, and I would just get attached right to Army units. So we bounced around in I was in the kind of the northeastern region of Iraq, and we went numerous places. We bounced around and kind of went where we were needed.
Again, people listening or watching are going to ask themselves, and I am asking for them, therefore, why was there a shortage?
Mm-hmm. So there were casualties, obviously, right? That's the kind of the obvious answer. The next answer is the Iraq and Afghanistan wars saw the use of IEDs just skyrocket, right? That was the enemy's number one weapon of choice. And I forget the exact statistic, but I think it was in the mid 70s, something like 73, 74% of U.S. casualties were caused by IEDs. So there were a lot of IEDs, and just the aggressor forces on the ground didn't have the organic EOD capability to be able to handle all of it. So all of the services really kind of came together for well over a decade and made it a team effort for that mission.
Am I correct in assuming that the day came when you had to put all of that practice that you had gone through in school into play in real life?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Within I think 48 hours of us showing up and getting on the ground, we had our first call, and it was one of the common questions is, well, how many, right? And that's a hard one to answer, because if you have one incident where let's say they've strung together 5 or 6 different artillery rounds into one larger bomb, do you count that as one? Do you count it as 5 or 6? But I think for me, I ended up averaging around 100 to 120 missions on that deployment.
And how long was the deployment?
Going out on responses. 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what that first one was like for you.
Yeah, Scott, the first one was, for as nuanced as our job is, and some of the trauma that other EOD men and women have gone through, my first deployment, looking back, was really average. Nobody close to me got hurt. Didn't lose anybody on our team. We went out, got a lot of great experience. Got some exciting calls. Some of the in the firefights and things like that, but came out of it unscathed, and it was really just average. And looking back, as a young, immature kid looking for an adrenaline rush, it was probably not great for me, because I came back with a pretty big head on my shoulders, and I was like, man, this was awesome. This was an adrenaline rush. It was great. I got to go do my job, and I came back. You're jumpy every now and then. You get used to driving. You're taking your Humvee down the road, and there's a piece of trash in the road in Afghanistan or Iraq. Is it a bomb? Is it a piece of trash? You get used to kind of reacting. So it took a while to get used to being back in the States, driving down the interstate in South Carolina, and seeing a McDonald's bag on the side of the road, not thinking that it was a bomb. But yeah, really that first deployment was just a standard run-of-the-mill EOD deployment for me.
Did it feel different though, being real life? Like, were you so caught up in the adrenaline of the moment that you weren't thinking, okay, this is a little bit different than those practice drills? Or was that just something that you blocked out of your mind, or was it there?
Yeah. So going through, I mean, we do pre-deployment training, right? So you gather up as a team, you go run training scenarios for a couple of weeks to get your team cohesion, running, and you'll go through, wherever you are deploying to, you'll look and see what's been going on in that area. So, you don't really get a lot of the ops where, hey, this person went out, responded to this item, everything went great, and they went back and had lunch at the chow hall. Like, that's kind of a non-issue, right? What you do is you sit there for weeks and you comb through, hey, this person went and did this and was killed. This thing happened and these people were killed. This one happened, this person lost a limb. This one happened. So you kind of start combing through those. And my buddy that deployed with me, and our first two deployments were actually on the same team together, but it was his first deployment as well. And I remember looking at him, and we were like, man, do you feel like we're going to die on this deployment? And I was like, we're just looking at bad report after bad report after bad report. So it takes, a week to kind of shake that off and say, all right, this is, we were just preparing worst case. Obviously, this is real life, but not every single operation is going to be, at the 100% level, right? So there was that initial kind of jitterousness, because of that, but it subsided, and we got in the groove of things pretty quick.
Did a time come when things didn't go perfectly?
On the next deployment, yeah, it was. So I came home from that Iraq deployment, and just days away from my first anniversary with my wife. So we, by the time we had gotten married, we'd been married a couple weeks, couple months, spun up, training, did the deployment, came back, decompression, and it was already time for our first anniversary. I was back in Afghanistan in the first part of 2009, and I don't know if how much people remember about that time frame, but 2009 was when we really surged into Afghanistan, and in conjunction with that surge, the U.S. government and NATO was really trying to get these civilian casualties under control, because there was quite a bit of collateral damage in a lot of the operations. So on the ground, what this meant for us was that there's a huge surge in operations, but also a big restraint on our rules of engagement. Basically, the guidelines that say here's when you can and cannot shoot back and engage enemy forces and things like that. So and the thing about Afghanistan is Iraq, it was kind of a mind game with the devices. In Afghanistan, it was more of a tactics game with people, where in Iraq the device was kind of the focus. In Afghanistan, the device was oftentimes a instrument to make you get into an engagement with people. So it seemed like in a lot of situations, in Iraq I was fighting a device, right? In Afghanistan, at certain times we were fighting people who wanted us dead. So that the mind games from that alone, right? When you're constantly going out on missions saying, man, there's people out there who want to kill me just for the flag that I wear on my shoulder. Definitely starts playing some mind games with you. It set this this tone. And so we land in Afghanistan, and the day that we get to it's called a COP, a combat outpost, they were having a memorial service for two Army individuals who had recently gotten killed from that outpost. And that just kind of set the tone for that deployment, day one. And there were a lot of combat operations on this deployment, on that one in 2009. A lot of people around us getting hurt and unfortunately getting killed. Yeah.
Did your perception of your job, of your life, your mortality, of your connection with other human beings change, particularly in light of the fact that you're talking about a different social milieu that you were operating in with
Sure.
regards to these weapons and their own purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that's a loaded question. I'm trying to understand or trying to figure out how to respond to it. So it goes back to that common enemy type thing, right? There's the people that I deployed with. We kind of joked, you can have 10 years of friendship in a 6-year deployment, or a 6-month deployment. Sorry, 10 years of friendship in a 6-month deployment, just because of the circumstances and the things that you face together. The idea that people wanted to kill you without knowing you as a person. If somebody knows who I am and just thinks I'm a jerk and they want to kill me, that's different, right? but the just wearing that identity as an American, and people are like, hey, we don't like what you're doing, we want you dead. That was a kind of a new feeling, I guess. What this deployment was starting for me was a kind of a unique relationship with death. This 2009 deployment really removed my innocence when it comes to death. As a child growing up, I'd been to my grandfather's funeral. I'd been to my parents' friends' funerals and things like that. I had seen dead people in a casket. I had never seen somebody get killed, which started me on a pretty unique journey for dealing with death. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit more about that. What shifted, when, and maybe begin to explain how.
Yeah. So this deployment, we kind of always lived under this, I mentioned that undertone of death when we first showed up. And we were going in and out of this really, really bad valley. We were putting, a few individuals in there to work with the Afghani law enforcement. So we would, change them out every so often. And we were having people getting their trucks blown up, or they were, out walking and they were getting blown up. We were getting in ambushes and things like that. So it seemed like every time we went on a mission, somebody in our convoy was either getting hurt or killed. And you kind of start to wonder, like when is it going to be my turn? And I even joked. So we had satellite internet out there in our tent, and we had a satellite phone. So I would call and check in with my wife every now and then. And we had some friends. He was stationed in Korea, and he was getting his mid-tour leave about the time I was getting home from Afghanistan. So his wife and my wife we all wanted to go on a cruise together. So I was like, yeah, I'll jump on the internet and take a look at it. And I ended up booking a cruise. And I looked over to my team member, and we joked. And I was like, hey, I just paid for a cruise that I'm never going to get to go on, But there's that thought, of when is it my turn? So towards the end of that deployment, I was, we were days away from going home. There was a Army friend of mine, also an EUD person, who got killed, running an operation. And we had to, go out, and it was a very complex situation. Not all of the device had gone off. So we had to go out, kind of finish the device, the parts that hadn't gone off, then do remains collection on him, and then do what we call a post blast. We kind of do an analysis and try to figure out what happened. So during that time, we didn't have a decompression time, which the military later fixed, right? But there wasn't really much in the way of that at that point in time. So I went from sitting on a couch in our tent watching a movie with a friend of mine to, a couple hours later, I'm picking up pieces of him, putting him in Ziploc bags to try to get him back to a body bag on the main base, to doing his ramp ceremony to load him up, to about 9 days later being in my living room in South Carolina with my wife and my dog. So there's this undertone of I'm going to die any day, and then it never happens. And what I found out when I got back to the States, that feeling that I was going to die soon never left. So I'm back in the States. I'm, under no danger other than what's typical of being in the States, depending on where you're at. But that feeling of, when I'm leaving my house, man, is this going to be it? Never really left me. The loss of innocence from my friend, that started a 10-month period where every single month for 10 months, I lost a friend or an acquaintance. And during that period, some of these were due to combat. Some of them were due to accidents. Others were due to suicide. Then the following year, so 2010, trying to get my dates right. So a few months after my 2009 incident that I'm talking about with my friend is when my first boss that I had, him and the gentleman who was and still is my best friend. I mentioned my kids are willed to him. It's that guy. So my first boss and my friend are in Afghanistan. We get a message saying, "Hey, Adam's been killed. Josh is hurt." And then, hurt in EOD could be a concussion, or it could be you lost both arms, both legs. You have no idea. So walking through that, and then to later on in 2010, losing another close friend. So during that period, I lost 3 close friends, and then numerous other acquaintances. So that period for me was kind of this just introduction to death, where I'd never experienced anything like that on the outside.
Hello, it's Scott Mason here, and I wanted to take a moment to thank you for joining us on part 1 of the season finale of the very first series of Scott Mason's Purpose Highway. In part 2, Cole will return to detail how he dealt with the emotional trauma that he experienced overseas, how he developed a new relationship with death, and the process through which he found meaning in life. It's a powerful episode with lessons from which we can all learn. And I very much look forward to you taking a ride with us down the highway next week. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple or a comment on YouTube. And we look forward to another ride with you down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. Locally made in Brooklyn, It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's itsnola.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.